Hello and welcome to the newscast. I'm Daniel Che here to give you the latest. It's election night in South Korea. We're seeing the results emerge for how the 21st National Assembly will take shape. First of all, about 3 hours into vote counting for South Korea's 21st general election. To fill us in on the process, our Kim Dami joins us from the Olympic Gymnastics Arena, one of the vote counting facilities here in Seoul. Dami, please fill us in.
Good evening, Daniel. As you can see right behind me, around 800 people are diligently counting the votes. In the last general election in 2016, it took around 8 hours to get the final results, but this year it's going to take longer. Here's what we have so far. As for the ballot count across the nation as of 9 p.m., it stood at 1%. Breaking it down by the major regions of South Korea, in Seoul, we stood at 0.2%, in Gyeonggi-do province, 1%, in Busan, 0.7%, and Daegu at 1.5%. Hopefully, we should be able to see some results taking shape by around 2 a.m. In fact, the National Election Commission predicts that for some single-member districts, vote counting will end around 4 a.m. But for the proportional representation seats, counting will go on until 8 a.m., and the final results will be announced on Thursday afternoon. This is because while the district ballots are counted by machine, the PR ballots this year are too long for the machines, so they have to be counted by hand. They're so long because this year there are 35 parties, which is a record number. Across the country, there are around 64,000 vote counters, an increase of 35% from the last election. On top of the need for a manual vote counting, things are different this time because of the COVID-19 crisis. All the vote counters are wearing face masks and gloves while keeping an appropriate distance from one another. The top priorities at this election are sanitation and safety, so the polling stations are ventilated on a regular basis. And any volunteer who feels unwell will leave the facility immediately. For the real-time updates, the National Election Commission is also providing the count online. That's all I have for now, but I'll bring you more updates at our later newscast.
All right, Tammy, thank you for being out there for us. We appreciate it. The National Election Commission says preliminary voter turnout is the highest it's been in almost 30 years at 66.2%. The figures could go up when the final numbers are confirmed. Lee Kyung-eun has the latest.
As of 8 p.m., the estimated voter turnout rate is 66.2%. That's the highest figure for a general election since 1992. It's also 8.2 percentage points higher than the final turnout from the previous general election 4 years ago. In the 6 previous elections, only twice has the country seen a turnout of over 60%. Such high turnout is mainly attributed to last week's early voting, which reached a record high turnout of 26.7%. Breaking it down by region, the city of Ulsan has seen the highest rate with 68.6%. The capital Seoul is in third with 68.1%. The lowest so far is Chungcheongnam-do province. Much attention was on the southeastern city of Daegu, the city hardest hit by the COVID-19 outbreak. In the last general election, its voter turnout was the country's lowest, but this year it's among the top 10. In fact, the city clinched the top spot briefly this morning. It seems like COVID-19 has drawn people closer to politics, not away from it. The NEC is taking a little longer than usual to announce the final turnout because the polls were open later for voters who are quarantined. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
The ballots for the 2020 April 15 general elections have been cast. The NEC is in the process of counting the votes. As the results come in, it's going to be an intense couple of hours with contrasting atmosphere in where the two main parties wait and watch. As our Kim Dami reported, the process is not simple. It's complicated. It's been ongoing since 10 p.m. local time. To help us dissect the digits and zoom in on factors that impact the elections, we're once again joined in the studio by Arirang News political correspondent Kim Mo-kyun.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here with us, and making time for us to share his insights is Professor Immanuel Pestrich, formerly from Gyeonggi University and also serving as the president of the Asia Institute. Welcome to our program.
It's a pleasure.
First of all, Mo-kyun, it seems like we have the numbers that we need to look at first and foremost.
Yes, Daniel, unlike the past, the exit polls have been released at 6:15 today, 15 minutes later than the usual because of of people who've been self-quarantined for COVID-19. To give you an overview of the seat distribution, more than half of the 300 seats are colored in blue, which represents the Democratic Party and its satellite party, according to our exit poll from KBS. The poll says that the ruling Democratic Party and the satellite Civil Together Party would grasp up to 175 seats, while the main opposition United Future Party and the Future Korea Party will finish in second with a maximum of 134 seats. As for the highly symbolic Jongno, where key political heavyweights are elected in South Korean history, more than 56% of the votes have been counted, and the ballots show ruling Democratic Party candidate Lee Nak-yeon taking the lead with more than 60%. Much attention has been focused especially on the district, as both candidates have served as prime ministers of South Korea, and the winner of the district has been widely considered to have a higher chance to presidency. If the final results turn out to be similar with the exit polls, the distribution of the seats in the 21st National Assembly will be similar to the 20th National Assembly, where the ruling party had the most seats.
Right, Morgan. Turning to Professor Pastrich, it seems so far the election seems to reflect the people's confidence in the current administration, judging by the numbers.
Absolutely. It seems that we have a general positive response to the ability of the current administration to respond to the challenges of COVID-19, and in fact, internationally has received much praise. We had just an article yesterday in the New Yorker in which Korea was praised as being an advanced country, and it was contrasted favorably even with the United States in terms of its policies. We have a functional government which has been able to respond in a appropriate manner, and I think many citizens were impressed by that.
Right. Turning to you, Morgan, it looks like since this election have been held at an extraordinary situation, the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, what are some of the key differences compared to previous elections?
First, as part of efforts to contain the spread of the virus, for the first time, the National Election Commission has implemented various measures, such as making voters wear masks and gloves and making them stay at least a meter away from each other. Also, the passage of the Electoral Reform Bill last December, the legal voting age in the country was lowered from 19 to 18 for the first time in Korean history. 18-year-olds make up just over 1% of the total eligible voters, and some 548,000 additional voters, mostly high school students, have cast their ballots in this election. Another thing is that voter turnout has been reported to be 66.2%, recording the highest voter turnout in general election history since 28 years ago. If we take a look at the turnout per region today, Ulsan has been the highest turnout with 68.6%, while Chungcheongnam-do has the lowest with 62.4%. The record high voter turnout during the... Yes.
Right. We are seeing, of course, as you mentioned, record high voter turnout in the early voting period as well. Professor Pastrich, these are impressive numbers on the early voting as well as election day or voting day itself. How should we interpret this enthusiasm from the Korean public?
Well, to start with, it's incredibly significant for the world. This is the first major election since the COVID-19 crisis, and we've seen enthusiasm among ordinary citizens for the political process and for participation, not the discouragement we see in other countries concerning politics and government, and that, I think, is an extremely positive aspect of the Korean response. I think it's a continuation of the coordination between government, NGOs and citizens in the response to the crisis over the last few months, in which we've seen a remarkable degree of sort of harmony in the relationship between citizens and government.
Right. Turning back to you, Morgan, speaking of voter turnout, initially there were some concern about the figures, how it could be affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, if you look at the overseas voting population, there was only half of them able to cast their ballots.
Yes, like you said, since early April, concerns have been raised over the impact of COVID-19 on voter turnout. The National Election Commission canceled overseas voting in 65 diplomatic missions in 40 countries for the first time since the system was first introduced in 2012. This meant only half of the nearly 172,000 eligible voters were able to cast their ballots. Koreans in the US, the UK, France, Italy, and many other European countries were unable to vote.
Right, impressive situation here in South Korea, setting the pace for the rest of the world to follow. Speaking of which, Professor Pastrage, efforts to raise voter turnout has been ongoing. They've been pulling out all the stops. South Korea has become the first in the world to carry out elections during this very difficult time. What are the critical takeaways for the international community as they watch this process?
Well, as you suggest, it's the first successful election since the COVID-19 crisis, and I think it gives tremendous hope to other countries in the world where people were worried whether politics and society would be paralyzed, maybe for a long time, to say that it's possible to go forward, to return to a relatively normal environment, and Korea has led the way. I think that has left a deep impression on people around the world. Of course, there's an enormous tasks ahead of us in terms of addressing economic and social issues resulting from the tremendous crisis. But at least Korea has given the world something of a sort of a torch, a flame, an inspiration.
It's always not easy being the torchbearer, but an honor as well. Initially, there were concerns the general elections could be postponed because of the COVID-19 situation.
Right.
What were some of the key factors that made it possible for South Korea to hold the election anyways, regardless?
Well, I think as I suggested a moment ago, the coordination and the response to the crisis originally between government and citizens, a sense of trust between government, parties, and citizens made an infinite difference. Also, we saw some very innovative approaches using ICT technology to try and coordinate the response to the pandemic. And those were perceived by most citizens in an extremely positive way, not seen as like the government taking over, but as a positive effort. And I think most Koreans really felt that Korea would be able to return to normal, and it has proven for the world that it's capable of doing that. I think that was very inspiring.
Right. It's a very difficult time, but during these times, sometimes you find certain countries or individuals that fight harder with their backs to the wall.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Turning back to you, Morgan, now the votes are being counted. So when are we expecting the final results to come out?
Well, the National Election Commission says the outline of which party won how many seats in the local district will be revealed by 2 a.m., but the vote count is expected to be completed by 4 a.m. on Thursday. Counting for votes for the proportional representation system, meanwhile, will likely be finished at 8 a.m. due to the extraordinarily long 48.1 centimeter PR ballot paper and because of the complicated calculation method based on the 50% mixed member proportional representation system. The final results are expected to be announced on Thursday afternoon.
Right. Lastly, before we let you go, Professor Pastrage, how do you see the political landscape altering or changing or shaping up after this general elections, especially with the next phase for the politicians we're mentioning today?
Moving towards the presidential election.
Possibly that as well.
Exactly. Well, I think first is one might have expected in this sort of off year that maybe the opposition would make a little bit of progress, and I think the inability to get that sort of momentum forward, and the fact that the current administration was basically able to show itself as quite capable will probably leave on the conservative side to a lot of deep thinking and probably some changes, maybe finding some new approaches. We also, I think, should note this election is unique in that North Korea or North Korean threat was not highlighted, that it was focused on domestic, economic, and of course, health issues. And so it's a little bit unusual in that respect, perhaps suggesting new possibilities in terms of Korean politics. Lee Na-young, you mentioned, in the Chungno district, has shown himself, I think, as a very effective administrator and politician, and very wise, I think, too, in the way he was able to sort of keep back in the background under President Moon, but then show himself in his capacity here. So I think he's the person to watch. But there's still plenty of room and plenty of challenges as the administration will be facing considerable economic and social complexities in the year ahead.
Right. We will see more interesting developments from here on. This is not the end. This is a midpoint, we suppose, for the political arena and those involved. Thank you so much for coming in today, Professor Pestrich. We appreciate your insights. And Mo-kyun, thank you so much once again for being here with us throughout this session.
Thank you.
Now, the 2020 general election got underway with strict quarantine measures in place due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's turn our focus now to how those in self-quarantine came to vote and how the outbreak affected one of South Korea's fiercest political battlefields, Seoul Central Jongno-gu District. Here's our Kim Jae-hee.
Voters wearing face masks, getting their temperatures checked, and disinfecting their hands. After putting on plastic gloves, they patiently wait in line, standing at least 1 meter apart from one another. This is how South Korea's 2020 general election was carried out on April 15th due to the global coronavirus pandemic.
It's my first time voting like this, but I feel clean. I think a lot of people like it this way, and I hope they continue to do it like this.
I think it's a good idea to carry on with the election. It looks like everything is going well as people are wearing masks, gloves, and keeping the right distance from each other.
Those in self-quarantine were not forgotten. The government came up with a separate voting timeline for them, 6 to 7 p.m., after all other voters were finished. For this, the quarantine restrictions were temporarily lifted from 5:20 p.m. to 7 p.m. But only those who had applied prior to the election were allowed to vote. According to South Korea's Ministry of the Interior and Safety, around 23% of all those in self-quarantine, over 13,000 people, had applied. Self-quarantined voters like those at this polling station in Seoul's Central Jongno-gu District, deemed crucial in terms of its political importance, were accompanied by health officials in full protective gear. They were checked for any signs of the virus, such as cough or fever, prior to them casting their vote. They also used a separate voting booth set up outside the building as a precautionary measure, and the booths were disinfected thoroughly after use. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
Countries across the globe are closely watching South Korea as it becomes the first in the world to head to the polls during the COVID-19 pandemic. Various media outlets report the country could be a role model for how to hold a major election at the height of the crisis. Yoon Jung-min shares with us their remarks.
South Korea's 2020 general election has been in the global media's spotlight. The BBC has elaborated on how voters in South Korea have kept at least 1 meter between each other at polling stations and how election workers have checked temperatures and disinfected about 14,000 voting stations. The BBC added that most people seem to be happy to put up with the short delay for the sake of democracy. Bloomberg reported Wednesday that South Korea holding the largest election since the start of the coronavirus pandemic might spur other world leaders with good poll numbers to follow suit. It went on to say that the decision contrasted with some U.S. states which have delayed presidential primaries. Italy's daily newspaper La Stampa also highlighted South Korea's general election on Tuesday local time, saying that the country has not given up the election despite the COVID-19 pandemic. It added that the country's approach could be a model on how to hold elections during the crisis. Other foreign press, including Al Jazeera, Time magazine, and The Telegraph, all also reported on the election. According to CNN this week, dozens of countries, including Sri Lanka, the UK, and France, have decided to postpone elections due to the pandemic. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
오늘 투표장에 갔었을 때 예전하고 좀 사뭇 느낌이 달랐어요. 왜냐면 1m 거리 두기를 하고 있었기 때문에 그 부분도 새로웠고
이 지역에서 좀 더 이 지역 발전을 도모할 수 있는 그런 지역구 후보를 뽑아야겠다라고 생각을 하고 투표를 했고요.
위기 국면을 돌파할 수 있는 좀 튼튼한 정책들이 마련되어야 하고 그리고 일관성 있는 정치가 진행이 되어서 좀 똘똘 뭉쳐서 헤쳐나갈 수 있도록 그렇게 체력이 길러지면 좋겠다는 그런 생각을 했습니다.
국민의 통합을 해야 되겠고 특히나 이 정치하는 분들은 정쟁을 좀 없애고 국회에 들어와서 정을 논의하는 그런 정치인이 돼야지.
그냥 한 표 한 표 이렇게 계속 투표를 올리고 투표권으로서 이렇게 시민들이 계속 이렇게 정치를 주목하고 있다 그냥 그런 거를 좀 기대를.
일단 아이들이 원래 처음 투표하는 해에서 소감은 좀 벅차네요 가슴이.
이번에 만 18세로 태어나서 처음 투표해보는 건데 학교에서 회장, 부회장 이런 거 뽑을 때 많이 했었는데 그런 거랑은 또 느낌이 다르더라고요. 격차를 줄일 수 있는 다 같이 좀 행복하게 살아갈 수 있는 그런 정치를 해주셨으면 좋겠다고 생각해요.
The leaders of South Korea, China, Japan, as well as ASEAN members agreed to strengthen solidarity and enhance regional cooperation in the fight against COVID-19. Following a virtual summit, they set up a joint fund for health emergencies and vowed to implement a system to reserve essential medical supplies. Kim Min-ji tells us more.
The ASEAN Plus 3 leaders have agreed to set up a regional COVID-19 response fund. In a joint statement following their virtual summit on Tuesday, the leaders said they would relocate existing cooperation funds, stressing the need to ensure adequate financing to contain the pandemic and protect people's lives. They also plan to establish a system to reserve essential medical supplies. To minimize the socio-economic impact of COVID-19, the ASEAN Plus 3 will encourage regional interconnectedness by facilitating the essential movement of people, including business travel. They also reaffirmed commitment to keeping markets open for trade and investment, as well as to maintain emergency food supplies. A strengthened early warning system in the region for infectious diseases was also suggested, and for the timely and transparent exchange of real-time information and measures each country has taken. The video conference presided by Vietnam, this year's ASEAN chair, was similar to the virtual summit held between the leaders of the Group of 20 in late March. COVID-19 cases among ASEAN nations has topped 21,000, up from less than 1,000 around a month ago.
Facing the seriousness of this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, we need to promote the valuable tradition of unity and hand-in-hand cooperation to strongly overcome this challenging and critical situation.
During President Moon Jae-in's turn to speak, he said that South Korea will secure additional funding for humanitarian assistance and respond to the fullest extent possible to any calls for help from other countries, including ASEAN nations.
한아세안 협력기금 활용 방안도 협의 중입니다. 아시아개발은행 신탁기금을 통한 지원 방안, 아세안 플러스 3 차원에서의 기금 조성 방안을 포함해 가용한 모든 재원이 동원되어 회원국 모두가 함께 코로나19의 위기를 극복하기를 희망합니다.
President Moon said that South Korea will actively share its first-hand experience and know-how, adding that he hopes the initiatives agreed upon Tuesday will lead to tangible outcomes that can put an end to the COVID-19 crisis. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
South Korea reported 27 new coronavirus cases, bringing the total to 10,591. This marks the 7th straight day the number stayed below 50. The Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said that while the number of new cases remain low, chances of further infections persist, with people heading out to polling stations on Election Day. 11 of the 27 new cases are from the metropolitan area, from Seoul, 5 from Seoul, and 6 from Gyeonggi-do Province.
Good evening. The weather will continue to stay warm, but please be aware that there are still large temperature gaps as the mercury will fall significantly overnight. Dry weather warnings have been extended to parts of the south, such as Gwangju and Busan. The dryness is forecasted to continue until Friday, when rain is expected nationwide. And taking a closer look at current air quality, yellow dust from overseas affected daytime air quality, but returned to back normal levels. Fine dust concentration in Bucheon is at 23 micrograms, Paju 19, and Seoul at 24, all standing at normal levels. Morning temperatures tomorrow in Seoul will be 10 degrees Celsius and Daegu 8. Seoul will be at 25 degrees, which will be close to the weather of early summer. And as rain is expected on Friday, temperatures are expected to fall back to 16 degrees. And during the day tomorrow, Tokyo will see afternoon showers and Beijing will have sunny spells. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That does it for us at this hour, but do join us for more updates on the general elections and more in our later newscasts. As always, thank you for watching.